All right. Welcome, everyone, for this Sunday afternoon. I guess we could call it a masterclass. Joaquin has graced us already on several occasions with some incredibly insightful geopolitical updates. The world is moving very, very, I mean, there's many different directions, many different futures pulling us as a collective species into various directions. Only a couple of those directions are actually, I think, befitting a civilization premised around dignity and natural law. Many of those other directions and orbits that we're being yanked towards are a little bit too similar to feudalism and Nazism. So I think that we've all got a sense of what those negatives would be and what is intolerable. Joaquin has a very good sense of a lot of the top-down dynamics shaping history, shaping our world, and anybody who's listened to Joaquin or has followed his incredible Telegram channel, which is one of the most insightful and useful Telegram channels that I follow on a daily basis. They already know this. So Joaquin, without further ado, I'm gonna open up for
Thank
you
you
to
for
just
that. Thank you.
yeah. And like usual, just before you start, it'll be a very, very interactive discussion. So if anybody, like usual, has a question or a thought you want to share, just please put your name in the chat box and I'll call upon you in queue. So Joaquin, it's all yours.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thanks, and thanks for having me. I appreciate the introduction. We have our approach today. What I would suggest for the class would be, number one, of course, anyone following headlines right now is going to know that there's a Serbia showdown right now and a crisis between the authorities of the Kosovo, of the breakaway Serbian province of Kosovo, by the happened number of decades now, and the showdown today, where the president of Serbia is going through the formalistic process, within the rubric of numerous agreements, but also the UN and the Security Council resolutions relating to the Kosovo situation. By the way, this UN Security Council resolution does not recognize Kosovo as an independent country, and there's a lot of different, and neither does the United Nations. And by the way, that's not the most important criteria for things. That's just letting people know sort of like what's going on from a legal point of view. And the crisis right now where there was a shooting earlier today, there's a standoff now, and earlier, about an hour or two ago, Vučić was on telephone consultation with Putin, and the Russian Security Council, if it wasn't Putin, forgive me on that particular point, but it was either the head of the Russian Security Council or it was Putin. And their discussion basically, and none of us are a fly, in the room on a wall there, but it would be good to know what was said. But I think it's an important, I would surmise, and I'm not trying to be pessimistic, but I would almost surmise that it was sort of like a last check. I mean, in the worst case scenario, right, with Kosovo and Serbia, it was a last check with Russia. Like, so is this the process, or what sort of provisions do you think, or where do you stand on that right now? And I say that because in the past and up until I think today, of course, people who follow some of the telegram of Maria Zakharova, Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson. Let me know if I'm still coming in clearly. I know there's some technical issues. I don't know if I'm frozen.
No, you're good.
Okay, good. And I know that with that they have said, repeatedly, and up until today, the Russians have been saying that they will support Belgrade and in every decision that they make, and that they recognize Kosovo as a sovereign, integral part of Serbia, right? Integral part of sovereign Serbia is, I guess, grammatically correct. And what people should know about what's happening right now is there is a Serbian minority in Kosovo, which once upon a time was a majority. That's where, Serbs in the heartland of the Balkans originate very much from this area which is over time, demographics have shifted some. And now when people know, and we talked about this before, but for those joining us maybe the first time who would like to know something short about it, is that during the time of socialist Yugoslavia, the Serbian part of Yugoslavia. So even though you had all these different, you had Montenegro, you had, Croatia, of course, you had Bosnia, Herzegovina, Slovenia, right? Kosovo was in the Serbian Socialist Republic of Yugoslavia. So it was never an independent thing. But within that, and carried on till today, it had been recognized as a fairly autonomous constituency within Serbia. So what they had envisioned and where their sort of last, best, and final before the United States decided on a military option was they considered this and they proposed this. They said even greater, further, in fact, greater autonomy and further autonomy than we've really seen anywhere in international relations, that Serbia would be willing to give Kosovo the highest degree of autonomy, as an autonomous republic, even within Serbia. Okay, this is similar to the Russian system, where you have autonomous republics within the Russian Federation. That's why it's a Russian Federation, not a Russian unitary state. Just similar in some way to the 50 states of the US, right? So the thing is that Kosovo seceded based upon their ethnic majority of Albanians. And they're now in an economic crisis because the EU has told them, you don't have to worry about Serbia. And now they're entirely reliant on a lot of foreign and not easy supply line stuff, especially when I talk to this audience, you understand how very important like road transit is, rail, road, things like this. And in terms of efficiencies and drawing in communities together. And that has been like what unfortunately, the US occupation, the NATO occupation in Kosovo has been bent like on cutting those roads off, blocking those roads, blocking traffic and things like that. So it's very difficult for Serbs on either side of the, the sensible border. And the recent crackdown has been of the Kosovo, I guess you could call them Albanian, ethnically Albanian. It's horrible. I don't like to say because it's a very, it might cast Albanians in greater aspersion, like the way that this particular story has played out, and no one should make them think that the Albanians are like the bad guys in history or the bad guys in any other situation or anything like that. This is not a thing where Albanians are having some kind of crisis or messed up people or anything like that. And forgive me for like informally just saying it that way, but I think that that's the best way to connect on that subject is really to explain that this is a NATO project to promote a minority of Albanian people into power who are pretty crazy, frankly, and have condoned and been a part of human trafficking, especially with regard to the Kosovo network. And people can look into the stories of human trafficking. They're horrible and gruesome stories. So that's what's happening right now, like as a big flashpoint that the Russians are involved in, that the Serbians are involved in right now. About an hour and 15 minutes ago, there was a deadline for some type of resolution where Serbians holding on a barricade. There'd been a shooting early today, as I said. Serbians holding on to a barricade were told that by about an hour ago to disperse or there'd be further violence. Heading up to that deadline, I think we know now for folks who've been listening and following more recently today's news that Vučić asked in a funny way, and we'll explain that if you'd like. Vučić asked NATO if he could send the Serbian forces in to protect the Serbian minority, and that's because NATO is supposed to actually, in its own imagination, NATO is the neutral arbiter, and in its own imagination, NATO is the one that protects the interests of the Serbs and the Kosovo Albanians in Kosovo. And so he made a mockery of this process, knowing the answer is a negatory, as they say, and trolled them. Recently, he also trolled NATO and the West, collective West, when he said, he always trolls it, by the way, from this perspective of like, Serbia is being asked to do things and Serbia is being told to cooperate in the Western order of things. So, hey, we're just going through the process that you guys told us to. So speaking recently about the destruction of the Nord Stream line, he said to journalists, to the press, he says, I think by now we all know who and why exactly is responsible for the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline, the bombing of the pipeline. But in the West here, we're being asked to be naive about it. So we'll follow suit and we'll play naive about it. And that was his statement about it. He never said anything, technically, right? He never said anything about who did it, but he said, we all know who did it. And I think that's a big sign. I think that's a writings on the wall type of thing, when all of us just have to communicate like telepathically. We just communicate like winks and nods because everyone knows the real score. I think that's when we know that that outdated power models are going into the past very quickly.
Yeah, that was a very, very good way to start this conversation. And I think that there's so many different trigger points being lit on fire right now, and it's really important to be able to appreciate some of this backstory, what's going on behind the scenes, because what we're being given on the surface by mainstream media is obviously a deflection, and we see these anomalies. I got a question: when Blinken just showed up in Kosovo not that long ago, what was that? What was he setting up? What was the nature of the discussion? Because it was really after that visit that things really started heating up in an enormous way.
Yeah. We would surmise that what Blinken informed his employees, the Kosovo government, to carry out the instructions. It's important to understand that people understand that the government of Kosovo is completely from the ground up created by the Clinton wing of the Democrat Party. This is very similar to the government in Ukraine from Poroshenko onwards, right? Where you had Victoria Nuland, remember, handpicking every person, like this person's going to have this position, and right. So this is identical to what has happened in Albania and Kosovo, and with this, when you have Blinken coming in there, this is because why? Well, this was an important visit. It was the first of its type in a while. And during the Trump years, there had been an extreme cooling off. Like Trump was very good with Albania, but very cooling off with Kosovo. Like under the Trump administration, they were not providing the type of assurances to Kosovo. And in fact, in the Trump years, the Trump years, right? Like in 2019 or 2020, they made an agreement actually that's now not being honored. And so Blinken, I think, was coming in to go in to officially like confirm that this policy is reversed. What are the things that when Vučić met with Kurti and with Trump that they had agreed to? Well, a program for Serbians to move back to Kosovo was one of them, okay? So it involved a huge housing project. And interestingly, it kind of looked like a 1950s like suburbia, and I think it was called Sunnyvale or Sunnydale or something like that. And it was like it was a suburban development project to draw Serbians back into Kosovo. And I think that involved an American real estate company. I think that's why Trump also was with a very, think about when Trump was in Israel and the thing had to do with like building construction and stuff, like a housing community, probably for settlers though, but God forbid, the whole thing is such a mess in the world that we can't look at any particular thing happening and draw the same conclusions that we used to even 5 or 10 years ago because of the rate of change. And likewise, with American policies, you have, this Trump administration, the Balkans were very cool. what you had a lot of during the Trump years was a lot of these NATO hawks writing op-eds for The Hill, writing op-eds for the New York Times, Washington Post, saying that Trump's policy on the Balkans is disastrous, that it's, what's the word, like letting the Serbs get away with murder or whatever they imagine. It's always this projection of, it's always this projection onto the victim of the crimes, right? So this has been like, when you think about everything that has come up to this moment, that the showdown and the crisis points are happening right now, like as we speak. Matt, this is what we talked about what would happen if the conflict in Ukraine, progressed, if it continued on, and if the stakes were going to be raised. We said everything's going to spill into the Balkans. A lot of people are focusing on like Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, because of the sensitivities there. And when people think geographically, Serbia is much more close to Italy than it is to Russia, right? Like geographically, it's kind of like a Mediterranean country near the Adriatic and stuff. So it's, people don't understand or think about the strategic significance or the corridor or kind of things that would be required. What we know, and I was reviewing, a colleague of mine sent some slides over to me earlier, showing people, it's a Russian group that gets into current and old foreign policy textbooks and primers and slideshows from like different American think tanks and stuff like that. And this one I think is from the Institute of War or whatever, and it's showing basically confirming everything that we've talked about on here with you, talking about like Mackinder and Rimland and the idea of containing Russia. And all of this is like, actually the policy. It has nothing to do with human rights. It had nothing to do with communism when the issue was that. Today has nothing to do with human rights, has nothing to do with gays, has nothing to do with journalists, has nothing to do with anything except the one truth that we heard, of course, from Madeleine Albright, which is that issue is that Russia is just too big. Russia is just too big. That's it. That's the crime.
Yeah, unacceptably large with all of that, all of those resources.
Yes. How did all of our resources get under Russian soil? That's like what I want to know.
Absurd, eh?
Someone they think they are. So
yeah.
So that's how I would introduce today. And then what I would then say is like, look, what are the principles that we can see? By the way, guys, in just preparing today's class, I didn't follow up with what happened an hour ago with the deadline with the standoff. So by all means, like while we're here, like let us know what you're hearing in news and stuff, maybe in comments. I'm like tempted like right now to look at the news instead of, because this is actually happening. Like you guys know I live right here where it's happening. So it's a little bit like February 22nd, and the tensions are very high right here, right now. But yeah.
And you had your finger on the pulse early on. You intimated that this was going to be the orientation that the geopolitical system was going to be moving in as early as the outbreak of the Western coup in Ukraine. And you immediately made you're one of the few people I know that wanted to get deeper into the fire in order to have like a better feel for the pulse. And you've been there now on the ground.
I was younger at the time, and I wasn't married, I didn't have kids, none of those things. I was more of an adventurer, as people know. And I self-deployed into the West Balkans, thinking that the crisis flashpoint would be here, because when Vučić came into office just a year before I arrived, I knew one of the offices, not 2016, 15, but prior, you have like prime minister, presidency, things like that. And when Vučić, when his party came into power, and I came to Serbia permanently the year after, but I had visited Serbia during the year of the political campaign leading up to that. And the things that I knew then was that this was like a 70% or 60% reversal. That's how these reversals go, so people don't have outsized expectations and stuff. Like it was a 60% reversal of the political occupation of Belgrade by pro-American forces. Does that make sense? So while there was a war in Yugoslavia, the United States bombed Serbia, bombed Belgrade, deployed troops to Kosovo, cut Kosovo off from Serbia, but then politically Belgrade, had very pro-American leadership up until Vučić. So there had been some chinks in the armor, like before Vučić, and people and even people that the Americans liked much more than anyone else, that even they said this is going too far. So there was things that led up to Vučić that were favorable to his politics, which is really the politics of about, give or take, 65-70% of Serbians, which is to say they're moderate nationalists or healthy patriots. They're not against private property, or they're not against like society. They're not against normal things. They just don't want to be told that the farmers can't own the land, that the things that we produce in Serbia can't be Serbian, that we don't want to live under EU regulations. And we have, unlike when you go to sterilized, and I love Hungary and stuff like that, don't get me wrong, but what's happened under the EU provisions that unfortunately like Hungary has to follow, many of them, despite their resistance, which is honorable, they're still in the EU, mind you. And Hungary is much more sterile. Like in the places that in Serbia, we have true farmers markets, not like fake farmers markets, like real farmers markets, they have nothing. They don't have that. And that's the stuff that the EU takes away, right? The right of farmers to farm, the right of people to grow their own food, to trade, to barter with neighbors. And this was something that Serbians knew was important because they survived the war. And this is something that we know is important because all of us now, like you, all of us, we have survived lockdowns. We know how important it is to have access to food, and that food is part of sovereignty. You can't talk about sovereignty without talking about food, right? You can't talk about society and survival without food, of course, but you can't talk about, having your own power if you don't have your own food. So food supply is a huge issue. And the thing with the strategic significance of the Danube River is that NATO considers it a NATO river. Okay, it's one of the main natural trade routes of Serbia, into the Black Sea, and it goes. Most traffic, of course, goes from north to south, like from northwest to southeast, because of the natural flow of the river. But traffic goes both ways, of course. And this river it stretches all the way. I think it starts in the Alps and it goes to the Black Sea, as people know. And this is sort of a natural border in a sense of worst case scenario, that if Russia were to expand, they wouldn't want it to be beyond that river. Like they want to keep Greece and stuff like that. They think that they could lose countries like Romania and Bulgaria, that NATO could lose countries like Bulgaria and Romania. That's a fear that NATO has. And they reinforce. So there's a lot of other contingent issues with this. We won't spend a lot of time, but I'll just mention that, for example, the roads in the Balkans, in the Central and Eastern Balkans, the main roads are all east-west running roads, but NATO needs north-south transit. So they're actually building new roads through Romania, Bulgaria that go north-south just for NATO. Why? Because up until now, Serbia had a friendly agreement with NATO. Serbia is a neutral country and has said, like, yeah, you guys can, they have observer status with the CSTO, which is like the Russian Security Treaty Organization, but it's observer status, kind of like Armenia was and stuff like this, but they're close to it. And they do the biannual drills with Belarus and Russia, the Slavic Brotherhood parachuting drills. And so they train actively with the Russian and Russian military, right? The Serbian military does. So it's a very complex question for that reason, but Serbia seems to be the problem to to NATO's overall security policy and cordon for the Balkans. And they want to be able to have rapid deployment resource ability to get from, let's say, the Aegis or from Greece onto land and up through Romania, Bulgaria, into Ukraine directly. You see, there's a lot happening right now. And while they're like you mentioned, Blinken, going to speak with Kurti, for example, or going to Albania, if it was rather to Tirana, then I think that did you say that Blinken went to Pristina or to Albania, to Tirana?
I
But he
believe it was.
met.
You know what? I don't remember the details. I just remember that he met with
Yeah,
Osmani
the
and
reason it's such a detail is not that. Okay, yes, I recall this now. Yeah, the reason that this is the details of whether that was the Albanian leader of Albania or the Albanian leader of Kosovo is irrelevant is because both of them are only receiving paychecks from the United States directly.
right.
This is unfortunate. Like you go to both in Kosovo and in Albania, they have statues to people like Madeleine Albright, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, stuff like statues to the leaders of the world's largest pedophile human trafficking racket. Okay, it is unfortunately like I know that Albanians don't like this, like proud Albanians. I'm not talking about internationalists or peaceniks or something. I'm talking about solid Albanians, like who I might not agree with about questions about Greater Albania and things like that, maybe finer points of history. They understand that the misleadership of their government under this kind of NATO thing is totally messed up and leading them to bigger crisis. So, and one of the things that I don't want to see happening, like, is people thinking in terms of like good Russians, bad Ukrainians, or good Serbs, bad Albanians. You see what I mean? Like, this is also very toxic thinking in my view, because there's good people everywhere, and those what we need to draw out. Like we want good Albanian leaders, like we want good Serbian leaders. We want good Ukrainian leaders. You know what I mean? We don't want bad Ukrainian leaders. Like Ukrainian people are good. They deserve the best. You see? So this is my attitude and my approach to things, and the type of culture and the internal dialogue I want to have on these subjects, right? Mm-hmm. And it's important for everyone, and because if you present yourself as the champion of a certain people, you're going to be seen as the enemy of another, and every people in the world are beautiful. All of them have had struggles. All of them have had deep histories. All of them have been through so much together. And that's what they think about when we appear as being for this people or against another. You see what I mean? So that's where I'm at with it. Your background in room, you look like you're in my office right now. It's totally weird. Like the door there, and so weird. Did you change? Did you move?
I did. Yeah. It's a new house, new study, but
wow.
Same books ultimately. But yeah, I guess great minds design alike.
Well, you have a very strong ability in that
maybe
arena.
On some subconscious level, I saw your background too many times, and it colored how we positioned our bookshelves. Now, I'm gonna try to ask questions or call upon people as they show up in queue. But sometimes, somebody writes a question out, then it just fits more with a line of thinking that you say. So if that happens, I'll just put that person to the front. I apologize for those who might be waiting a little bit longer, but I'll try to get across everybody. We have about 90 to 120 minutes, so we'll try to make the best of it. Jan Martin Glorson writes, Joaquin, how do you interpret Kosovo, Serbia from NATO Atlanticists' viewpoint, either as a plan B as Ukraine is subdued, or do they still believe that they are expanding its containing of Russia? I don't know if that's...
Yeah. It's a very good question. Yeah. Containing Serbia is containing Russia. This is not my maxim. This is like an ancient, American 100-year-old maxim. This goes back, all the way to the early 1900s. That actually from the late 19th century, had people like Archibald Rice and others who had visited Serbia and been involved and had supported Serbia's war effort during the First World War, right? So you have this understanding that Serbia is a kind of a type of like a little Russia, right? And is it a plan B? It's sort of like I would call it almost like a hostage situation where NATO can't really move against Russia. NATO can really move against a country, with 8 million people, right? The capital of Serbia has 2.5 million people. It's not a giant country. It's 8 million people. And they're surrounded on nearly all sides by NATO countries or NATO applicant countries, NATO member and NATO applicant states. I think all of them are NATO. Wow. Or NATO applicant, yeah. So it's, they're surrounded, we're surrounded, I'm here. We're not coming out with our hands up though. And that's been the problem. And it's not so much a plan B as if Ukraine fails. Of course, if Ukraine fails, they will try to continue to pursue this. This is not a long project. This is not something that we'll wait and see what happens even next year or 6 months or 3 months. We are now 300 days into a limited high intensity or limited full intensity conflict, regionally limited, but full intensity conflict. Only, 2 countries away from here, right? You just go one over and then you just go either Romania and then Ukraine, or you just Hungary and then Ukraine. So Serbia is just one over from Ukraine. People should appreciate the geography of Europe. It's not the United States, it's much smaller. So, you can drive, like you might drive from Los Angeles to San Francisco in 7 hours, but you can drive from Belgrade to Venice, Italy in the same 7 hours, let's say. The speed and the time that it takes for these strategic bombers and attack planes to travel is not very long. NATO got to observe Russian activity in the Syrian conflict, where the Russians were firing their surface missiles from strategic carriers in the Caspian Sea. So from the Caspian Sea hitting Syria, right, with strategic. This is the reach of this stuff. So it takes about 30 minutes from Russia's closest geography to get to Serbia by air at a high speed. But it's a good question. It's not so much a plan B. These are things that what I wanted to say is more accurately is this, okay? A very good example to draw from was how the NATO or the US was doing the conflict in Ukraine and the conflict in Syria at the same time. And they were pushing on both, and as we saw, actually lost on both. But despite that they were losing on both, you would think they would maybe stop one and focus on the other to see that succeed. They didn't. They have compartmentalized different, they have so much resources. The issue is not resources. Okay, they have manpower, they have the experts, they have the different departments. So people working on Syria, we're not competing for resources with people working on Ukraine. Okay, talking about US, NATO, right? If you follow some of the stuff, and this can be a little tricky, maybe you have to get out the microfilm and get into the newspaper archives, but if you follow, because the internet gets scrubbed so often, if you follow the things that were happening, for example, like in the Syrian conflict, whenever there would be something that, like, let's say with Aleppo, that was a huge, let's say, slowdown or crisis in the attempt to destabilize Syria, within the next day or so, there'd be something big happening in Ukraine. So so this means that they definitely push both agendas, and they definitely don't rely on one to succeed for the other one to work. But ideally, they want all of them to work. So ideally, they're all like chained together. But if one of the pieces doesn't work, they still pursue all the other pieces. Because if you don't, then you're kind of sending bad signals, and you've also invested in these things, and you might get 20% benefit still of some of these other things that you're lining up. Like, but they ideally want all these things to cascade and like domino and like come together beautifully. But if the question is like, if NATO fails in Ukraine, do we still have a Serbia crisis? And that's a very good question, because it's hard for me to separate a success for Russia in Ukraine without that doesn't send the very similar message or cool things off with Serbia. If Russia's successful in Ukraine, it gives them a much better position vis-a-vis Serbia. We talked about a 30-minute or 40-minute air travel time. Well, if Russia is now in Ukraine, that becomes a 15-minute or 10-minute trip or less by plane. We're talking about like attack planes or fighter planes. Okay. Anyway, so there's another question. I see it. It has to do with the Orthodox Church.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It flashed very quickly. Do you have it?
Sorry. Go ahead.
Could you help me with that question?
Yeah, sure.
There it is.
Well,
no.
Peter, do you want to ask your question yourself, or do you want us to read? Peter, why don't you go ahead and ask your question? You're on mute, by the way.
Oh, okay. I think I'm off mute, but essentially the question was with respect to what you're seeing in Serbia and the dynamics of Kosovo, also Ukraine, Zelensky, and probably under pressure from the U.S. because this has been continuing. Zelensky has been suppressing and actually criminalizing the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which had already really seceded from the Russian Orthodox Church, as I understood a couple of years ago. And in Montenegro, there were also suppressions of the Orthodox Church. And these dynamics, which maybe in the West we don't know how to pay attention to, were defined by Huntington and the Clash of Civilizations. And so when we see that it's coordinated across, all these countries, including Armenia, Georgia, all the Orthodox countries, since Madeleine Albright, they have been, it seems like it's a long siege of Orthodox countries. And so how is Serbia under this pressure?
No, it is. That's all very fair. That's very accurate. It's very astute. Thank you also for the question as well. What has happened in the Russian Orthodox Church is the all Russia Orthodox Church, and so there has not historically been like the Orthodox Church. Even though we don't have a pope, and sort of like the patriarchs are all co-equals of the different regions, it's not like each country has a church per se. So it's sort of like, what is the historic church of that people? So if you have like the Bulgarian church, you have the Serbian church, you have the Russian church, you have the Greek church, etc. There are Greeks who live in Turkey, right? And there's not a Turkish Orthodox Church for the Greeks of Turkey, right? So the Russian, the all Russian, the thing is that this can be hard for people to understand, that the Ukrainians themselves and many other like brother people of the Russians in the Russian Federation or in Belarus, for example, this idea goes much farther back in time than modern nation state borders. So it's called like the all Russian Orthodox Church, and it's really for all these different people. It's just called all Russian. It's based in Moscow. Okay. So what happened is that Vatican and NATO intelligence have been working and hammering away at Orthodox Church for centuries. It's really, for example, there are some things that are even disturbing. There are some very good Catholics, for example, that want to see a return to Latin Mass, talking about the Roman Catholic Church, that want to see a return to Latin Mass, that want to see a kind of reversal of changes in the last few decades. And many of those things that they want are quite admirable and decent things that I support. However, some of the organizations that are within the Catholic Church that are helping this project along are quite nefarious. And some of these are attracting people on a good foundation for good reasons, such as SSPX, the Society of St. Pius X. And this is important because despite their very good criticisms of kind of like the hedonistic and liberal drift of the church, they stand by this kind of crusader, Knights Hospitaller attitude that only Catholics are Christians, and that by sword or by hook or by crook or whatever is required to do it is legitimate under this kind of knightly order kind of concept of things, okay? Talking about SSPX and kind of not sedevanticisim, but just people who are in the church but critics of Vatican II. And so the thing that's happened is that actually the Patriarch of Constantinople, which is in Turkey today, right, has been flipped, or his career has been groomed, right? And he is a pro-Western, pro-NATO voice, and one of the most powerful voices in Orthodoxy, because he is the Patriarch of Constantinople. He sits in Phanar, which is kind of like Orthodox Vatican, right? The thing is that it's in a Muslim country. So anyway, it's see how many funny twists and turns there are. But keeping kind of like keeping it very tight for us, what this guy did was he recognized a Ukrainian Orthodox church that has no connection to historical Orthodoxy, that is not the Orthodox Church of All Rus, right? It's a pro-Vatican, pro-NATO upstart that's calling itself the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. And there was the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Moscow Patriarchate, which is the official one, and then there was this kind of breakaway one that was the Ukrainian Orthodox Church that was autocephalous, meaning they had their own head that wasn't recognized. But what the Constantinople did was recognize the breakaway one, okay? There was several breakaway ones, in fact, and they kind of all decided to kind of come. There was a breakaway one that there was a critic within. There was, 2 or 3 different brands, and they all came together to be called the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. Not to be confused with Ukrainian Orthodox Church. I think that's the word order, Orthodox Church of Ukraine. Yeah. And then, okay, so technically speaking, if you're Orthodox, you can still go to Orthodox Church. But the story is much deeper and much more fascinating. I'd love to give 5 more minutes on what's really happening. You see, I know people are saying Judean People's Front for Judea, but these are very different organizations. Time travel yourself several hundred years ago and think about literacy levels and think about how people really didn't be more than 10 or 15 kilometers from their place of birth, right? 100 years ago. And 200 years ago, the same, okay? The process of destroying the Orthodox Church in this region has been going on for a long time. And there were people, especially in central and Western Ukraine, who believed they were Orthodox, who, because they go and it's Orthodox Church, you know what it looks like. The Mass is in Old Church Slavonic. The rite is the Byzantine Rite, okay? And they believed that they were Orthodox. And they only found out, like when their kids learned how to read, or from, at the turn of the last century, that they had been scammed, and that it was actually a Catholic church that is called the Greek Catholic Church. It's not an official, it's called, but they're called Greek Catholics, meaning that you think it's a Greek Orthodox church, but they're Catholic. And that's how this phase actually began several centuries ago. And this is an ongoing thing of switching Orthodox people into a church that looks, feels, sounds, and at this point still calls itself Orthodox, but really is going to go in the direction of the Uniates. The Uniates being the Greek Catholics. So it's going to just be an extension. It's going to be the Vatican control over churches that look like Orthodox, that people might cross themselves the Orthodox way and all of that. But in another 100 years, then it'll just be, I don't know, a gay pride parade through the center of the, I don't know what, I don't know which way, whatever way, the Vatican's going, you know what I mean, is going to be the way. And I pray for, restoration of health of the Vatican. I'm Orthodox, but I'm not like a religious, whatever. I mean, in the sense of, I think that everyone, I'm more concerned like about my sins in my life. You know what I mean? Like people are all on their own personal quest and journey with the Creator and everything. Is beautiful. And I love all the religions. But I can tell when they're taking wrong turns. And, our religion has been taking a wrong turn because we wound up with this guy in Constantinople who's totally upside down with his head up his butt. And Catholics in the West also wound up with some very, very, very poor, popes in recent times. So I think this is a global experience. And I'm not saying like,
Are you talking about Bartholomew, the Green Patriarch?
Yes, we are. Yeah.
Yeah, right. He's the Orthodox version of Francis. Yeah.
Yes. Big mess. So yeah, it's there is an Orthodox church still, but it's fake. And it's actually controlled by Vatican intelligence, and it's an extension of Uniatism eventually in Ukraine. Yeah.
Could you just clarify a little bit more for my own mind's sake, as well as the audience, that Uniate is not something I've looked at.
So the Uniate Church, the so-called Greek Catholics, okay, is that, you had Orthodox people in Ukraine, right? Then they were conquered by the Poles and they became part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, right? So people were converted to Catholicism and stuff like that, like Polish Catholicism, but without telling them.
Okay.
Like the money, like when you put the money in the hat or whatever, when you not in I'm just talking about like people church, but in Orthodoxy, maybe you have like 10 cents and you go and you kiss a icon and you put like the 10 cents or $10, if whatever you want, but into the little, slot under the little doggy under the icon, like the little mouth or whatever. And the church, like the priests live off that, and they don't live very well. And they live off of these donations. But for the ones that are actually Catholic, the money is part of some Catholic diocese and it goes back to, the Vatican. So that's been going on for a long time. And people thought they were Orthodox and only found out, later in life and in years that it was not. Now people who are Uniates, know that they're not Uniates, but their great grandparents were scammed into it. Does that make sense? So now people today who are Uniates, like, they believe that the correct way to do Mass is the Russian way, but they believe the correct theology is with the Vatican. I mean, no one really believes anything, right? This is all geopolitics, but I'm saying and it doesn't make sense if you understand these, but that's how you would summarize it. Yeah.
Okay, that's useful. All right. Yeah. I mean, you're taking a very, very complex topic and making it, this is like an introduction to the ideas, and obviously people have to do a lot of work to
I mean, like, and as even as in depth as I'm explaining it, I'm like still like smashing in some, time periods together and some processes so that they're like, that we can like talk about it and not, read for 5 years about it.
I've got Harinder has been waiting for a little while to ask a question, or maybe even a 2-point question. I'm not too sure, but Harinder, if you're still there, you can go for it.
Unmute.
There we are.
Can you hear me now? Okay. So, Joaquin, you've been talking a lot about the long-standing plan to destroy and quarter Russia or contain it, whichever way you want to describe it. You know, the Brzezinski plan, updated by the Rand Corporation. But there's more to it than that, right? I think Vladimir Putin is being vilified because he resists the global agenda that is now descending at a very frightening rate. The forced vaccinations, the climate change hoax. Thousands of farmers in Holland are now being told their farms will be expropriated unless they comply with the EU ordered rules. And there's a big coup going on with food, with Gates and Monsanto and so on. They're pushing that their version of food and synthetic meat and all is the way to solve world hunger and so on. So there is a lot, and this relates back to Kissinger's statements about control of energy and control of food as being the keys. So there is this globalist agenda, and I think from what I'm reading, Vladimir Putin is, for instance, the transgender agenda, the gender fluidity stuff, which he rejected. He made a point of mentioning that in his speech, incorporating Novorossiya for Donbass territories. So what are your thoughts on that, in my opinion? I mean, there is colonization of Russia as one objective, but there is also something else in the way, right? And
yes. I think these are very much connected, though. I mean, yes, in the way that you said very eloquently, but it's like, it's not simply that any there are, well, let's back up and say it like this, because I think your question really deserves an examination in this way, because while there are, on the paper, as you said, like the think tanks, whether it's Rand or these different Brookings Institute or whatever, and even though they come up with these things and reasons why Russia is an obstacle to their plans. So the things that on a deeper level, though, is that, and this is why it's hard to articulate, the lifestyle or culture or whatever that's being promoted in the West, they know that it's not sustainable for most countries, and it's very costly. It's very expensive. Meaning that the way that they've defined rights or freedoms in terms of transhumanism, okay, is not the package you don't get as sold, right? It's completely something else. So when you actually look at the very, very top, the very, the ruling class, how they order their families. Now, we're not talking about whatever rituals and weird stuff that they do, okay? But the way that they have families, right, and order them, okay, is very different from the type of advice, let's say, that they promote in the culture in the West, okay? People should first notice this, I think. It's not simply that Russia has certain culture and it has certain values, and here's some other culture with other values that it's imposing on Russia. If that were simply the case, then I think the conflict would even look different, okay? The values that the West is trying to impose on Russia are not values that Western elites order their lives around or order their families around.
It's just the populations that they're ordering. They're trying to force that agenda on populations, but not themselves.
Yes. That's right. They know that when communities are broken up or when families are atomized, that they become more moldable, they become more compliant, better consumers, things like this. Families, in a sense, are kind of like subcultures that are resistant to mainstream culture when mainstream culture goes to war with or is at odds with the normal daily life of a working family, of a functional family, I should say. Okay, and
which
at a
relates
certain
to the church thing also, just to interrupt. This is why churches were infiltrated, because this is where the families met and had relations with other families.
Yeah.
This is what they're atomizing.
Right, because families, how do families meet, right? And church is already a very powerful thing because you have a common faith and some common understanding, and now you're talking about maybe it's during fellowship or after mass or something, and now you're talking about daily life and things that are going on. Very, very true, very, very astute, and I think this is part of the process as well. So the way to understand it is that where social psychology and sociology and the level of those fields, like where they got to by a certain point, like in the development of those fields by the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, they were really, really in a strong way to fully weaponize these. So since we have to pick a time when these kind of events have cascaded, people talk a lot about like May of 1968, referring to the Situationists and the general strike in May of 1968 in Paris, throughout France, really. And then how the strike was kind of broken, okay? And how the strike was kind of broken was by the media and society focusing on the spectacle in the sense of Guy Debord, but focusing on the youth and the students. And the youth and the students at first kind of joined the workers in the strike, and the students went on strike too. But the media began to focus on the students and what the students were saying, and not on what the workers who were actually suffering and actually on strike and their leaders were saying. The students began to actually turn against the workers, and the students began to say that even the hard hats were a problem, that even the proletariat was too dumb to understand the problem of society, et cetera. This kind of French intellectual elitism, so to speak, right? I don't think it's a true thing, but people say. And that's where, if we're going to mark the beginning of this civilizational decision in the West, right? That, in other words, instead of promoting that we're a good example, instead of promoting, well, they continue to promote that they were a good example, but instead of promoting a good example, they continue to promote that they were a good example while giving very bad information, giving very bad, using soft power so that other countries emulate the United States, and they become weaker when they emulate the United States. What do I mean by that? Because the United States is, for a time, was so wealthy and had such a large tax base and had high tax revenues, okay, that we could afford to have all of these, freedoms, as they have redefined hedonism to be freedoms. We know they're not freedoms because they don't contain responsibilities. That's the freedoms test, by the way. The flip side of every freedom is a responsibility. In other words, like, the two things are connected. You can't separate them. What do I mean? Well, you can't say you have a responsibility if you don't have a freedom to carry out the things you need to secure that responsibility, right? And you can't claim to have a freedom if you can't claim to have a responsibility, right? If you're not allowed the freedoms to pursue them. You see what I mean? So freedom and responsibility are two sides of the same coin. What's being promoted is just absolute, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, right? That was Aleister Crowley's magic. That was Satanism by Aleister Crowley, okay? Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. And that extreme hedonism comes with a very high price tag. Some people enjoy it, okay? Cocaine, orgies, transsexuals, whatever, okay? Some people enjoy it. But the cost in society has been the highest incarceration rate, both per capita and in absolute terms in the world. We have more people in prison than China does. We talk about China, but the United States is the world's leading incarceration country, not China. And given China's population being, 4 whatever times greater, they have much less people per capita in prison than the United States. Now,
which is related to the breakdown of family and church, also all this stuff, promoting hedonism.
I'm saying all the values. This is the export model, this is export model American culture. It's meant as the pill you're not supposed to take. It's meant to give you high incarceration rates, high divorce rates, high drug addiction rates, high suicide rates. It's meant to give you those things. The point is that the United States made some, gambit, some reckoning that we could survive this, and that the United States could pursue global cultural, economic, social hegemony globally by promoting, basically, make sure to drink your acid every morning, make sure to gargle with gasoline as good advice. Like, imagine doctors like, make sure to smoke a pack a day. And these are the things that the United States is saying, make sure to let all the child molesters out of prison, make sure to raise retirement age to 75, make sure to do all these things that are guaranteed to destroy society. Not overnight, but within 15 years. So you can't maybe you start attributing to something else. You don't know that it's the lead pipes. You see what I mean? So it's a type of slow poisoning, and it's being promoted as this is what freedom looks like. This is what democracy looks like, and it's not what built the United States. It's not based in any of the ideas of common sense or the American system or anything like this. And it's designed to fail. I think that's the big takeaway. So when a country like Russia, it's not that they're saying, they can say that, and Russians who love Russia do say this, but the real point is not that Russian culture is superior or that Russians are better or any of these, that we don't want to become like you. They're actually, no, what you are promoting is inauthentic. You don't even believe what you're promoting. If you believe what you're promoting, we could have a conversation about it.
Yeah. In a recent speech, Putin even had exhibited a lot of insight by clearly stating that there is not one but two Western cultures and Western matrices, and one of them is traditional. It's based upon morality. It's based on something that we can work with and we recognize. But then there's this other thing that we're told is the only claimant to Western traditions and Western culture, which there's no point of negotiating with it. There's nothing to hold on to because it's so fluid and devoid of any principle or meaning to, or any ability to have a discourse with it in an honest way. It's just wild. And, I think that more people need to think a little bit more like Putin in that sense and think like, well, what is he sensitive to that I don't understand? If I'm thinking that, a lot of people only love the West because they have a very naive idea of, we're number one, or they hate the West and see nothing good in it. It would help a lot to just like be able to tap into what you just said about, well, if it's true that the current value system dominant in the West is all there ever was, we never would have gotten out of the Stone Age. There never would have been an American Revolution. There never would have been anything.
Right. The ideas that they're promoting right now can't build anything.
Yeah.
Right. They can only deconstruct them. And that's actually based in this critical studies in Frankfurt School material. This is based in the French postmodernism and the German poststructuralism. The French poststructuralism and the German Frankfurt School. So this is the crisis that we're in.
I've got a question for you on what you just said, because I interface with a lot of conservative American media groups. A lot of them are really, really good on so many points of the Great Reset, freedom, all of these competent things. But then their analysis, and there's a number of very influential voices I've directly spoken to and debated with who brought this up to me. And I'd like to get your take. I might even make it a standalone video. Is that China and the communists are obviously out to destroy the Western order with their Soviet Marxist compatriots in Russia because cultural Marxism, because they can see that critical race theory comes from this, it has people at the heart of it who were influenced by a sort of Freudian Marxist way of thinking. And they're like, but see, that's the proof. How would you respond to such voices?
Yeah. I would say that I would know. I don't speak to nobody. You see what I'm saying? Like, I speak to somebodies, and every somebody has a point of reference, and every somebody lives in the world, right? And every somebody believes in something, and every somebody, there's other people who believe in those things that are awful people. So there are good Republicans and bad Republicans. There's many different ways to be conservative. There's good Democrats and bad Democrats, many different ways to be a Democrat. You know, there's many different phases. There's good Muslims and bad Muslims. The world's a very complicated and large place. Marxism has a bunch of different things. It's like several hundred years old almost. So it's not like a new thing. And there's many people who've been influenced and taken it in many different directions. That's how that's not how I would address them. You know what I mean? That's just how I conversationally would speak to you, because you know these things. To someone else, I don't know who that person is, but I know if there's somebody, they have a point of reference. And I always find out what a person's point of reference is. I always speak to their point of reference because they make things relatable. And I think that, you know, but as a matter of fact, the Western Marxism is its own thing that's been around. It predates Soviet Marxism because Marx is like from the West. So Marxism is actually a Western philosophical project. It's actually based in a lot of 19th century German philosophy. So it's actually the Russians and the Chinese that kind of took a Western idea, you see, and made it their own. You know, they've added things to it so much, they made it their own. But like cultural Marxism is a really complicated thing, because cultural Marxism isn't about promoting an agenda of how culture should be. It is a critique of Western culture as it is from the perspective of people that don't have to create or build anything. So it's insanely flawed, but it's also has nothing to do with Russia or China or Vietnam or anything like that. Or Korea, or none of that. These are just like, it would be like talking to an Amish person about why in 1600 something the Orthodox Church of Russia did something. It's like, but aren't you Christians? And it's like, okay, the Amish are Christians, Russian Orthodox are Christians, but other than that, you know, never the twain shall meet. And like, I mean, you know, I hope so, but you know, it'd be a great conversation. But in fact, maybe that's what we should do, is find a good Amish representative and a representative of the Russian church and have them talk. Put the phones next to each other like this. And
are they allowed to use a phone? I don't know.
Oh no, that's right. Oh, good one. Yeah, to kick the horse and everything over. So they have the Western Marxism almost from the beginning has been fusing Nazi ideas and fascist ideas from the very beginning. Western Marxism is very interesting from that point of view, because it's much more flexible, and some of the arguments are better made than Soviet Marxist arguments from like the Stalin period onward, because that's just like governments making proclamations, whereas kind of like academics, as neurotic and misled as they are, have to kind of make arguments, you know, that justify things in a more argumentative, polemical way. So when Westerners read like ideas from the Soviet Union, which didn't have any challenger, versus kind of like Western Marxist diatribes, the Western Marxist stuff can seem very convincing compared to Soviet or Chinese Marxism. You know what I mean? Because it's tailored to how Westerners think, and it kind of fits some of their thinking patterns that are kind of like in Western culture. So Western Marxism, though, from the beginning was developed in the United States from the Marxist students of the Nazi Heidegger, okay, who believed that Heidegger was actually correct, but that Marxism was a better vehicle to develop Heidegger's ideas. I know that to people who understand what I'm saying are like, wow, that's fucking insane, excuse my French. But if I just conversation, it sounds like, oh, okay, so that was their project. That's like saying like, yeah, we were just, looking for, how to make an accelerant that cooled things off. It's like, the opposite of things, you see. And because in the United States, like in The Simpsons, it's very heavily parodied. The idea of the communazi, like remember like the Red Baron or whatever is like in the versus McBain or whatever, like in the cartoons and TV shows that are within the Simpsons. Okay, the communazis are bad guys that McBain, who's kind of like I don't know, like an action
yeah, like a Rambo character,
yeah, like a Rambo, Schwarzenegger kind of guy, McBain. So from an American perspective, fascism and communism have a lot of similarities and stuff, but philosophically, they're the least related like belief systems. Like communism has more overlap with liberalism, and liberalism has more overlap with fascism. See what I mean? But the fundamental ideas involved are like unrelated. So a believer in one is like immune from becoming a believer in the other. I think that's part of it. Okay. Like if you had been a Marxist and you had been kind of building a group of Marxists, but you had a lot of original ideas as well, like you'd be better off just kind of cutting off from the Marxists altogether and like just rebranding and making new discoveries and redeveloping it altogether at this point. The Marxists have stopped contributing anything, of value to Western culture in terms of criticism. But there's value in criticism. It sucks to be left with criticism and not, right, a lot of solutions. But sometimes fixing things comes with criticisms, and you have to explore all the different criticisms. There's a lot of things to learn in Marxism. Even learning how not to do things is useful as well. But there's a lot of positive things, that you can learn positively in it. Many people that we know, also experts in that subject. So it's a very good question. And the issue is that cultural Marxism is not a Marxist idea. And then I'm not saying it's therefore a bad term or whatever. It's just that it's not saying, oh, here's the agenda to be this way. It's just that it was bent on deconstructing the nuclear family. It was bent on deconstructing hierarchies. It was bent on deconstructing these things without suggesting anything in its place. Although writers and theorists would point to manifestations of queers or something like this as like chinks in the armor of this oppressive top-down hierarchical paradigm based in exploitative relationships where people are sexually repressed, and people who, that 1% of people that are naturally gay or whatever their theory is, would not be oppressed. Or that rather the same structures in society that keep everyone down can be exemplified and better studied in the way that society is suppressing transgendered people or gay people or minorities or something like this. So we can discover something about the mechanisms of control through studying the marginalization of, second-class citizens, something like this, okay? So there's use value in this, but what they also did, and their students and professors, is to look at all of these examples of just anything antisocial, and they conflate antisocial with anti-systemic, okay? There's a very big difference that these people are getting wrong, and this is the critical thing that could end civilization. There's a very big difference between like the temporary things happening now and the entire fabric of your society. By conflating society itself or civilization itself with a particular arrangement, bad arrangement, let's say. At a certain point in time, see people mutate, people fucking degenerate, excuse my French, sorry, people degenerate over time, okay? And many of these people that were like, they were regular like socialists, okay, that were just focused on the working class and workers making stronger unions and having strikes against greedy bosses. But as Western society, instead of doing like something else, we went for credit to make up for the competition to lower wages. And so because wages were going down, because wages were going down relative to productivity, but consumption was being maintained, like lifestyle was being maintained through credit, okay, the leftist intellectuals began to conclude that the working class, this is like in France originally, of course, in Germany, and then in the United States, applying the same ideas. This is like the 70s, 1970s that we're talking about, okay, in 80s, okay, that really there's no chance for the workers to rise up against their exploitative bosses. There's no chance at all because they're living middle-class lifestyles because society is being productive and workers are living well now. So, but they're still bent on destroying this society, even though the workers are living better than ever before. They make a good point though, that this is being driven by credit and not being driven by like fair compensation for their work. There's a very big difference between credit and earnings, right? Credit, you have to pay back. Earnings is what you've been owed. So being owed and owing somebody are like opposite things, but that's what they've changed how we've been paid. Now we owe instead of being owed. So this is huge. And that's where cultural Marxism comes in, because these Western intellectuals were not from the working class. And they just observed through culture and through media, they kind of bought into the lie that everyone's doing much better now. Yes, we are doing better than, 1700 maybe, or, cavemen, sure. But, relative to what is always the question. And so they decided that, or they concluded that there was no way to bring down society through a workers' uprising, but if you took every queer person and just made that grow, that would undermine the system, okay? That's what the activists think, okay? There are more intelligent people, though, at a higher level who know that that's a non-starter, but totally are just egging on these lunatics and have placed them in power in different areas in academia and hiring and culture and management and everything. But it's actually, they actually know, we can prove it, we'll do it later, but they actually know that it's insane.
Oh, it's a very, very interesting, and I knew you were going to do this. It was a very nuanced, good, thorough way of thinking about this. And I do suggest people review this. And I think I will make it a standalone little explanation video. I had a feeling I would. And I think part of this, I don't know what you think about this. And we've got a few more people who want to ask questions, so I shouldn't hog it. But actually, I'll just make a statement, and you could chime in if you want. But part of this, I think, has to do with what you were touching on, the motion towards, or the addiction towards, credit. And in academia, a lot of these people, as you pointed out, they never really developed useful real world skills. They weren't ever appreciating the productive forces of labor that are necessary to uplift people from squalor to a better way of life as a precondition for consuming. So you can't just consume and not have a focus on creation and production. And if you become detached from that, then whatever ideology you let float out there is going to become effectively destructive to the degree that it is ignorant of the basic reality of the need to create and sustain life of people. Yeah. And so a lot of these ideologies became weird Freudian, Marxist, imperial mutants. They just went on their own weird strains. And like Western Marxism has a history of getting behind every war of conquest. Also, like the original split, like there was a time that before the Russian Revolution, that who would become the Soviet Marxists were involved with Western Marxists before, way before what we call Western Marxism
way before Frankfurt and all of this, okay? But even then, Western Marxism was always subordinate in the final analysis to the needs of their own ruling class in their society. So in World War I, for example, the Western Marxists of Germany voted for war credits to go to war with Russia. Okay, Russia was a monarchy, and so they said things like, "Oh, they're they have a backward czar. Like we have a good, system, and they have a bad system. We have an emperor, and they have a czar." So this is goes way back. That was the last time that the people that would become the Eastern Marxists and the people that would become the Western Marxists sat in the same room and agreed, would have been, sometime before 1913 or 1914. It would have been before the Zimmerwald Conference. It would have been within the context of the Second International. Everything Russian, everything Chinese, everything is like Third International and afterwards. So I know that's all just like technical stuff, but people who know. And it's kind of like saying like, oh, Pope Francis and his going on about how we need to bring back Vatican I and da 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 da. It's like, no, that's the opposite of it. No, dude, like not at all. Like Francis is not at all like saying that. It's the opposite. Okay, he's taking Vatican II all the way, like all the way, guys. That's to conflate Western Marxism with, and I'm not endorsing anything. I'm just saying these are different things. Like so insanely different that when I hear people conflate these, it's a big sign of a blind spot in their, knowledge base or whatever. And then it becomes questionable, like, what kind of conclusions are you drawing, dude? Because, that makes sense. That you can imagine being like in some Buddhist country and they're talking about Christians and they start conflating, like, like we said, like every different branch of Christianity with each other. And I guess to them, it's all the same. But the thing that's interesting about Eastern Marxism is that everything is based upon like human beings creating things. It's all based in like labor, productivity, creativity, creation, physical economy. It's not based in abstraction. What has happened in Western, like you can get behind it or not get behind it. I'm just saying what it is. And it's based in real world experience of like statecraft and managing a society and stuff like that, having to do the job and being responsible, like where the buck ends, but where the buck stops. In the West, it's only been criticism. It's only been ivory tower. It's only been things that wind up so detached from reality that it's you really question, how far academia has gone into specializations that allow, graduates of those specializations to speak on such broad subjects that, I mean, it's really mind-blowing that how even Western Marxism is misunderstood. But the main takeaway for people is that it isn't Marxists who use Western Marxism, right? It's the people in power in the West who are using Western Marxism, okay? So, make of that what you will. But what we do know is that they themselves don't believe in it. They don't want to live in the kind of world that Karl Marx describes. They want to live, they want to remain in power. Mm-hmm. Karl Marx suggests that they won't be in power. And they're saying, no, we're going to be in power, but we're going to use all of these tools that different Marxists have developed, some useful, some bad. Okay. And it's like a science. It's like a social science. Just think of it this way. Imagine like, Hippocrates doing anatomy and stuff like that. And then, but if you want to know how to kill people, like where to stick a knife or whatever, you would also study anatomy, and you might also study Hippocrates or whatever. You see what I mean? So like, doctors take a Hippocratic oath, but some people study medicine to harm people. Okay. Marxism is this very interesting own project because it's more about tragedy and unintended consequences in some cases, but many of the intentions to destroy society are not present in there. So there seems to have been something that happened in Western culture after World War II in particular, that where it looks like the elites said, look, if other countries, whether it's Bangladesh or El Salvador or Korea, are going to be looking now to the West as a model of development, we have this is at the time, okay, after World War II, we have this like 1950s type of society that has, inherited the experience of the Great Depression and World War II. So it's much more ordered and oriented, much more ordered, and it's oriented in such a way that individuals have a lot of freedom because they have a lot of internal discipline. Okay, like freedom is the extension of internal discipline. That's where freedom comes from, at the level of the individual. Okay, so what's interesting is that these people studied like the anatomy of Marxism, okay, not to overthrow the ruling class. Now that's a different project that's fraught with its own potential disasters. Do not get me wrong. I'm just saying they took this thing that was an analysis of how to overthrow a ruling class, but they read this as a ruling class and said, well, if this is how ruling classes get overthrown, then these are the things that we're going to do to prevent being overthrown. So cultural Marxism has actually been a tool of the ruling class to keep workers and small businesses from thriving and existing. So it's the opposite, actually, of what many of the Eastern Marxists have talked about or thought they were doing at the very least.
Well said. Well said. So we got a little bit of a backlog of people who I know have been waiting for a while. I'm going to try to get through as many as possible. I think we have 25 or so minutes left. Thereabouts.
Sure. I'm
okay.
With you. Things are stable here at Casa Flores, but if an infant starts crying, then story may change.
All right. That'll determine our destiny. So, okay, let's Thomas had a question on the recent intervention on the terrible plot in Germany by the monarchists, which was defeated by the intrepid security services. He was curious if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I guess this was Germany's attempt at a January 6th, talk about a massive fail of a story. Like no one even believed. It's just like how it's a good sign. Let me say it's a good sign in a sense, because it means that the German security apparatus right now, right, like the German state and the security have like invested zilch in false flags. They've invested zilch in like setting up these things. So, then pulling one off without any experience, budget, know-how, or resources looks like this. Far cry from anything believable. I don't think, I don't even know that the police involved in the investigation took it seriously, to be honest with you. But I think it was an attempt at a false flag, actually. It was just so comical though, in the end, and at failure on the media level. I mean, maybe they need to bring in Erkovich from Ukraine to help them, to consult or do these things.
Yeah, that's what I thought you'd say. All right. So yeah, no imminent threat of monarchists of Germany supported by Putin to overthrow the great government of Germany. Okay, all right.
It's like, look, there's levels in there that when I heard it, I'm like, oh, this resonates, because I know that Russians have good, contacts and relations with some monarchists in Europe, but they're talking about like Prince Sextus Henry, of Bourbon Parma and stuff like that, and the Spanish line of the French aristocracy and stuff like this, and they this branch of the Bourbon Parma, I guess it's like a cadet branch. But he is the direct descendant of Louis XIV. He's like the direct male descendant of Louis XIV. So that's a claim, like to be the king of France, right? Of what Prince Sextus is, and family and supporters believe. But they actually spent money and gave money to back and finance an international group of soldiers to fight on the side of the Donbass. So I can see where some of these things, like I'm sure that there's somebody in Moscow whose job it is to like foster relationships with every possible resistance or anti-system person, whether they're a monarchist or whoever, anarchist or whatever, right? I'm sure that there's someone's job to do that. And maybe this guy does have a claim that will never be realized, you know what I mean? But I don't think that it was a Russian plot. But when I first heard about it, I thought about what I just told you. Because I do know that they have high level contacts with, different people in the Bourbon Parma line. So it made me think. But they've never done anything like challenge France and say, well, we support this Spanish guy now. So
right.
No.
Thank you. And Monty has a question on U.S. nuclear policy and Russia. Monty, are you still there? Can you get yourself off mute?
Yes. Thank you very much. You hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Thank you, Joaquin. Two headlines which are not being covered in the mainstream media. I observed this week. One of them was UK mainstream media, Daily Telegram, had the headlines that Bakhmut death trap draining tired Ukrainian army. And it's just indicative of this situation where Bakhmut is in dire straits. It's being described even by Ukrainian forces on the ground that it's catastrophic. And the second one was Angela Merkel came out with a statement where she basically admitted she authored the Minsk II agreement and has admitted in their the Zeit that the whole thing was a deception. That they never expected it to work, and Putin basically came out with a retort to that. Now, in line with that, I really couldn't believe what I heard when I, in the context of these two headlines that are now being acknowledged in some media. The Biden administration, and I got this from interview with Douglas McGregor with Judge Napolitano on December 8th. I couldn't really believe it when I heard it, but I went back and re-listened to it. And appears the Biden administration has just adopted a policy this week for unprecedented change in nuclear weapons policy doctrine, whereby it clears the way for a potential U.S. first strike, tactical nuke strike on Russia territory or forces in Ukraine. And Putin countered in this speech that the Russia policy will now afford preemptive tactical nuke, preemptive retaliation if a U.S. strike is determined to be imminent. This seems like, on the part of the Biden administration, it seems very much Dr. Strangelove.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
And Mad Max combined.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if this level of desperation, insofar as they're not seeing things going their way in Ukraine, if this is just a desperate attempt
yeah, I think it is. I do believe it is a desperate attempt. It does connect to the other headline, the Merkel story. And I think that this is what you're going to see, what we're seeing right now. The game has been, for the past several months, the game has been to figure out how to get Russia to be the party that requests some type of ceasefire of any kind. It could be localized, it could be a certain zone or something in Ukraine that is demilitarized. Any type of demilitarization or ceasefire or something like this is something being looked at. I have my own views about what is happening in that conflict and, you know, what certain things look like. I am certain that that Russia has already been along a path that it is about to end of allowing a lot of provocations, open provocations, terrorist threats, terrorist actions now. It has been blaming Ukraine for these and being a little bit, you have to read between the lines to really get what they're saying, because they're saying Ukraine is not a sovereign state. There's no one at home in Ukraine. It's 404, right? Can't access this website. No one's home. And access denied, right? And they're not there. But because Ukraine, that's not there, is saying, we're here, we're a sovereign state, they're really not. So Russia is meeting them at that level of their claim. Why? Because there's no point, there's no debate about the fact that Russia has to eliminate the Ukrainian military. So they can do that from any number of positions. They can do that, they can fall back, eliminate more, they can move forward, eliminate more, they can fall back, eliminate more. Whether they're falling back or moving forward, it's 4-1, 5-1, 10-1 Ukrainian losses. It's really catastrophic for Ukraine, and it's sustainable only by life support, only by a constant inflow from Western countries of all the necessities of basic life, in fact, not just the military anymore. Civilians are now needing basic things too. I think that on the whole, you know, one of the things that you said about the nuclear brinksmanship that we're seeing and how it makes us think of like of Dr. Strangelove and this How I Learned to Love the Bomb. This type of nuclear brinksmanship, okay, actually we've seen before. We had with the Cuban Missile Crisis, but we have none of the people. We have only on the Russian side the type of people we need to have. We don't have that on the American side, and that's a great crisis that we're in, right? So in revising the nuclear strike policy, or clarifying what it means in the modern context of today, bear in mind that today or yesterday, the New York Times ran a piece openly calling for, saying that advice had been given, sorry, not calling, it wasn't an op-ed, it was reporting that the US military command is telling the Ukrainians now that they can strike deeper into Russia. So this is a huge escalation. The Serbia thing happening now, the escalation of this, and all along, leading up to this moment, they've been trying to get Russia to be the one to say, we want a ceasefire. Does that make sense? It doesn't mean that there would be one, and nothing means that. They just wanted Russia to say that, and it was going to signal a lot to them. And Russia did not say that. I think that what happened with Kherson city and the threat to flood the city and to, you know, flood the area was a terrorist threat, because it's against everyone there. It's meant to use the safety and well-being of civilians as a reason that the military should do something. And I think that others had suggested perhaps even that a nuclear thing, like the nuclear waste or nuclear cooling stuff or a disaster would be used to mix and, and have that flow into the Dnieper River, and then have that be like nuclear wastewater that creates a bigger, So I think that was land destroyer Berlich, who suggested this one. I am of the view that in light of Johnson's comments that Russia does not have the temerity or the presence to stand up to the West in a nuclear threat. Johnson said that, former PM Boris Johnson said that, I think, to media yesterday. This is projection. When you look at all of the things going on, and the fact that, how you have like gymnasts and they do a routine and they land it, at the end they land it, it's a 10. So Lavrov, landed a 10 in the way that he did include the word ceasefire or peace talks in a statement recently in explaining why it's not possible, okay? But expressing the desirability for one in principle, okay? Knowing that it's not possible. And what they would like to see happen is for Russia to suggest perhaps some cooling off or something humanitarian, something, if they could have arranged something differently with the grain. There's all these different pieces moving, you see. And if they hadn't blown up the Nord Stream pipeline, that would still be a threat that they could have made in the future. So it's always hard to evaluate, which cards have been played and which cards can no longer be played. We have to revert back to more like open source intelligence stuff, like basically knowable things like, hey, Russia has 300,000 reservists, all experienced, former military guys called up now to return to duty, half of them into Ukraine, or it's 180,000 or something like this, about half of them. And no sign of backing down, no sign of a general retreat, okay? Battle is not the war. And on the whole, no one believes that Ukraine is in a sustainable position. I have just tremendous sympathy for regular Ukrainian people right now, and regular people in Donetsk who are also being shelled. But everyone, all the people are living in hell right now. And most of Ukraine, they have rolling blackouts. And recently the development is these are no longer planned blackouts. So for a while, you would know, well, from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m., we'll have hot water for the shower or whatever. Okay, now they don't have that in Ukraine, okay? I think that this is horrible, what's happening to Ukrainians. Russia is doing it to them, okay? Russia is doing this to Ukraine. And that is where most people stop looking at what is happening. And I think that that is a very big problem, conceptually, that people are having. I think that the biggest distortion in the simplest terms was actually said by Kamala Harris, because she talks to everyone like they're 5 years old. So she was explaining to some people what's going on. And she said, Russia, a big country, is attacking Ukraine, a smaller country. And this is true, on the face of it, this is really true. And right now, you have Ukrainians going through for the past number of months, identical to what the residents of Donbass have lived through for the past 7 or 8 years, with the lack of water. They don't have water there. They don't have power off and things like this. This was once a city of 2 million people, had its own airport, its own civic center and everything. It was 2 million people, not 200,000 people, not 20,000 people. Donetsk was a big city, like Kharkov, like Kiev. Okay. All of the people are innocent. And, when you live in a society and they have a pervasive ideology, and you were not raised, by philosophers or anything like this, you just live your life, you go to school, you build a trade, you meet a girl, does her family like you, you get married, you have children, you want things, you live a life, you have love in it, you have purpose, you have work. And that's all that's happening in Ukraine. And they've been convinced, that it's Russia standing in the way between, the life that they want to have and the life that they have had. We're talking about until February, okay? And in addition to being told all of that, then Russia really does go in militarily. Can you imagine being a Ukrainian, Russian, because really it's all like this there, and saying, oh, they're never going to attack us. Like, this is what the enemy is convincing us, that Russia is the enemy. You see, Russia's not our enemy. Russia's the friend. Well, now Russia has attacked. See, so it's catastrophic for the narrative, and it's going to be 15 years into the future until you have, into the future after the SMO is successful, that until you have Ukrainians, majority people have like positive attitudes towards Russia. That's how long it takes. That's how long it took for people that had no reason to dislike Russia, because no one was there in whatever 1642 or whatever. Like, there's no reason to dislike Russia for Ukrainians for time immemorial. you have to go back hundreds of years to find these conflicts, right? Hundreds of years to find them. And it's like a non-issue. It's like totally in the imaginations, totally crafted in the minds of late 19th century German war strategists to find and create weaknesses in Russia. They invented Ukrainianism in about the 1870s, 1880s. Ukrainians never saw themselves as that. That's not a word. That's a description of a border. It's not a people. You have peoples in there, and they all had many different names. Real people, right? Descendants of Cossacks, people, different descendants of Russians, descendants of all kinds of different people, Belarusians, Poles, all types of different people. The Galicians, the Carpathians. So these are all people with like languages and stuff like that. The Carpathians speak Rusin. They're also called Rusins, Rusyn. The similarity to Russian is not accidental. And those people were given a new identity. These people, right? The Rusins, they were given a new identity by Germans, by Poles. This is the heart of Ukrainian Nazism, right? Of the old wave, the first wave. So, but many other layers in central Ukraine, Western Ukraine, Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkov district, all the, like, think about how Azov is from Mariupol, right? Like, that's very Russian. So this Nazism has spread, but again, like, people who have these ideas in Ukraine even haven't been exposed to many alternatives. There hasn't been reinforced at the level that it has in Ukraine. Ukraine has had from the West, they didn't learn the so-called Western values of like tolerance and whatever. The West fed them like a healthy supply of sugar-coated cereal every morning. The West fed them Nazism. So for me, ethically, my friend, it's a complicated question to what level, you know, people are responsible for their own brainwashing. And I generally think that these elites are responsible, not most Ukrainians, if that makes sense. So these ideas will go and die because they're not natural ideas for Ukrainians to have, because it's an ideology based in anti-Slavism. And you have to, like, you know, I'm going to make a funny parallel. Most people won't actually understand or know this, but I think it needs to be said. Like in the United States, there's weird internet movements of like Black young people, okay? And some of them are now saying that we're not from Africa at all, that we're actually, you know, it's a conspiracy theory, right? It's like an alternate history conspiracy theory. They're actually like, we were the Blacks that were here when the English came. And it's like, whoa, okay, this is very interesting. And they find some references to maybe somebody in 1680 met some people in Florida and said, oh, these look like Africans or something. Who knows, right? But in Ukraine, okay, they've been promoting that they're not actually Slavs in the way that Russians are Slavs. Russians are Slavs, that what Slav really has come to mean is a person that looks somewhat white, but mostly has Chinese DNA. This goes back to Nazi theories about the Slavic race, that they're basically Asiatics with Aryan phenotypes, okay? But the features show that you're actually Chinese, okay? So the Ukrainians are saying that they are actually Proto-Germans, that they are the original Germans. Because if you look at most of the common prevailing current mainstream theories, either on PIE, which is called Proto-Indo-European language origin, and the origin of the of Goths, some of the Gothic and like Ostrogothic groups that would move into Germany. The German tribes are not from Germany, right? So like the German tribes like moved into Germany from where? Like from the east. So were they Slavic tribes that at what point did they become German? Very weird stuff going on here. But at any rate, these Ukrainians have convinced themselves that they're not even Slavs. Others are like, we're the true Slavs. See, others are saying we're the real Russians, and those are the fake Russians. Dude, it is so crazy what's going on in Ukraine. Like every person has a different opinion, okay? So, but none of those opinions are correct. That's what they share. And my biggest concern right now, that Ukraine is becoming a humanitarian no-go zone. It's become a humanitarian disaster. It's important, I think, that our hearts and our thinking shift a lot towards like the hardships that everyone's going through, because there's going to be the other end of this, okay? And there's going to be, 30, 40, 50, 60 million Ukrainians, okay? They're real people, they're good people, they have big hearts, they deserve a decent society, right? And none of this is going to be based upon laughing at their losses or celebrating their power outages and things like that. Let the Russians and whatever have what they're experiencing, and that's for them, So
yeah, very, very well said. And yeah, I think that this is really getting us at the heart of world history as it's played out for thousands of years, is that many people fall into the trap of, thinking about their nation as being something material, or who they are as an identity as being something located in their particular genetic stock, their blood, their soil. And oligarchs, grand strategists have been playing us like a fiddle for a long time by getting people to lose track of the fact that what makes us actually human, first and foremost, is the fact that we're made in the image of something divine, that there's something within us that's beautiful, that's good, that gives us access to making our conscience healthier or worse by obeying it or not. And our reason is something which has to work in tandem with that thing called conscience. And to the degree that we do that and we act accordingly, oligarchs always lose their power. And we find harmony in those who might sound different, look different from us, but feel and have tapped into the same source. And whenever that happens, human beings get better. Oligarchs lose control. And that's in the domain of cultural warfare. It's in the domain of spirituality, of the arts, things that are higher than the material domain. And whenever we fall to a lower way of thinking, we get into these stupid, endless wars based on prejudices and assumptions and ignorance every single bloody time. It's crazy.
No, what you're saying is true in all fields.
Mm-hmm.
It's true for every field of for all the human endeavors.
Yep.
I'm optimistic though. The thing is that there's something so not right with this picture. Starting with the Arab Springs were really crazy. I mean, yes, we know the war in Iraq and this, okay, but the color revolutions, the Arab Spring and the head choppers and the ISIS stuff, this was like never before seen. For me, I'm like, something's not right with this picture in terms of this is the beginning of the end for them, oligarchs. Like, even though these are big displays of power in a sense, these are not displays of power that people confident in their power make. Like, these are not the types of things that stable societies do. Nothing is right with the picture of antagonizing Russia and Ukraine, Syria, none of those things. And I'm not saying, they're evil and they're going to win and stuff. Like, they're evil, but they're losing. That's what's so strange about it. We were kind of raised in a culture that good guys finish last. And this is a common theme, actually. I know that if you talk to Western mercenaries fighting in Ukraine, all of them have a devil may care, good guys finish last, no such thing as an innocent person mentality. How else do people justify that? Okay, so like contract killers or hitmen, right? When you talk about we were talking earlier about the type of ideas required to build civilizations versus the type of ideas that civilizations once built, might promote an error, might promote out of some sense of maybe being inclusive of every single possible idea under the sun, or exploring every possible, and exploring and these things are important to do, right? But yet something has happened where now Western elites clearly are not in control of their own story. I mean, even by their own narrative rules. So something very much not right with the lockdowns, with the Great Reset, any of this stuff. The way that they rolled it out, I mean, the stage crafting was strange. The dancing nurses was weird. I mean, the fact that you had Fauci and the whole thing had the spectacle of like it was a religious thing. And this is a very big turn away from the type of, again, false, like pluralism and open society stuff that we had been inundated with during the Cold War. So this is like Soros, open society, okay? But I think that when you talk about how we've been made in the image of something divine, I think this is very profound, and it's something that we've lost touch with the most, hasn't it been? I think the idea that human beings, there's like little strange cultural tropes that I pick up on, and I identify them, and I say, this is really toxic, bad information. Like, there's one that goes around that most people have heard, and it goes, you have to forgive yourself. You just have to forgive yourself sometimes. Hey, you just have to forgive yourself. And why that doesn't satisfy anybody is because it shouldn't, and it can't. We are incapable of satisfying that. We're incapable. It's not something that we can do. We can't forgive ourselves, and we shouldn't be able to forgive ourselves. Like when we've done something wrong, we can't just decide, like, does the fox decide to forgive himself after like murdering all the hens in the like, you can't forgive yourself. Like that like it is the people or that you've aggrieved that have to come to this place that they forgive you. And absent that, only God can forgive you, you see. And so it's these little things like that. Also, another one is whatever floats your boat. Like in conversations, you go like full effort and you're really trying to connect with someone, and maybe they trolled you into thinking they cared, and then whatever floats your boat. Matt, between whatever floats your boat, I think this is sort of like, well, whatever, or I don't care, which you've just said. I don't care to engage with this at all. I think the whatever floats your boat mentality, okay, has allowed people, okay, to be among people that might be different from them, okay, or have different ideas without ever engaging them. When people interact with each other, we're forever changed. Mm-hmm. And we can't predict the way that we're going to change from those interactions, my friend. But one thing for sure is if you prevent people from interacting, nothing changes. Okay. If you were an unjust hierarchy, an oligarchy, right, you would try to promote anti-communication skills into the public, So that when you talk about this human experience that we're having, and when we look at the humanity of Ukrainians, the humanity of Albanians, the humanity of people who NATO has weaponized to become like antibodies against another people, we can never lose track of the humanity in those people, not just the victims, but in the people that have been weaponized. Because in being weaponized, they've also been deprived of their own humanity. To be made into Nazi killers is to be deprived of humanity. And those particular killers, in the act, not surrendering, will be neutralized, will be killed in turn. But there are a lot of other people who are not soldiers that are passively holding these ideas because they've been brainwashed. There's nothing in Ukraine that would naturally keep those things on life support. As soon as USAID and Radio Free Europe, right, is out of the equation, Nazism in Ukraine is gone. This is something that was gone forever before. It was gone for decades and decades and decades. It was imported into Ukraine from Canada, from your friends, no, from the Canadian Ukrainian community, who, while, again, you interact with people, supermarket, beautiful people, but in this group, they all love Bandera and they all like Hitler. So this is strange, dude. This is very strange. It's going to be 10 or 15 years just to begin to visibly unwind that in Ukraine. It's not natural for them. I've seen changes, like intentional changes in the military dress code of Ukraine in the past like 3 years to look more Polish, to look more Lithuanian Commonwealthish. In 2016, 2017, they all looked like Russians. They had the same hats and everything. Now they're wearing these kind of Polish version of a Slavic hat. It looks like a 1930s type of, Mussolini Goes to Poland type of outfit. And yeah, it's very kind of brown shirty, actually. but instead of the like German cap, it's the Polish one. But Ukrainians are doing it now. They kind of mix, it's kind of, I get the aesthetics. I can see like the fashion designers involved in that. Like, well, we kind of want to let you know that it's still on the Eastern march of the Slavic people, but these Western flares show you that they're under the Western command. You see what I mean? The ideas in Ukraine that have been, we can study ideas of, you know, Ukrainian ideology, of right-wing ideology in Ukraine, to study everything that you want to avoid in building a society. We were asking a question, Matt, and maybe audience is curious too, okay? How do you have these radicals that love Ukraine so much that they're willing to die to the last Ukrainian in a war, in a battlefield, dying right now, while the elites of their country, okay, not a cryptic group, not a conspiracy, like the president of the country and the known elites, you know, of the country, whose everyone, you know, names are known, okay, are openly selling what's left of the country to the World Economic Forum sponsors, to the what is it called? The stakeholders, the global stakeholders. Those are the words that Zelensky used. And he said that in his address to the World Economic Forum, in fact. I find it very funny that there's few people that want to focus on the things that Putin went and spoke to the World Economic Forum without ever talking about the things that he said to the World Economic Forum. And it's funny, those same people ignore the fact that Zelensky, what he in fact did say and is doing in Ukraine. That's a very big question mark for me. We know who we're talking about. So I think that is a very big key. When you look at how these nationalists or Nazis in Ukraine, though, they think what? They're going to first defeat Russia on a battlefield, and then what? With that momentum, then they're going to clean their own house? Like, when has that ever happened? Like, give me an example, like just one, like where that theory is going to work. It's like, let's rob the bank, but first, let's like, no, dude, like, no, right? Just a bad idea, right? And it's never been done that way. So maybe the novelty seems like brilliance. I don't know, but
But yeah, no, yeah, you wonder where they like the rash. You want to put yourself always in the shoes of the other and think like, how are they look? What's their worldview, right? What's the worldview of an ISIS fighter, or even like someone higher up in the food chain within ISIS, who's just receiving massive CIA, U.S. military, logistical, and other support? How are they thinking about this big white devil that's supporting them? And do they? I mean, I know of a lot of these. You know, Ukrainian radical Nazis who at different times even fought shoulder to shoulder with ISIS officials, as Vanessa Beeley proved, who were flown in via or brought in via Turkey, some rat line. And a lot of them are, I've spoken to some here in Montreal, and you can't help that. A lot of them are very anti-Rothschild conspiracy, anti-world government, all of this stuff. And so it's not like they don't have critical thinking regarding international bankers, conspiracies, manipulating movements and stuff. And same thing for a lot of the ISIS, you know, sympathizers. They're often conspiracy theorists in opposition to world government agendas. But it's like, yet you're rationalizing accepting massive support weapons money from those same institutions that I think you kind of intimate are trying to use you. Or do you think that it's just like some divine force of like God is just on your side and playing the oligarchy on your behalf, helping you out because God really, you know, will just use evil to get good done or something? I don't know. Like it's
no. It's these are good questions. So I started to like dig into this question. You know, exactly the question that you posed, right? Because you have to answer this question to understand what's going on, right? And what's going on is that a lot of Ukrainians live in a totally segregated information bubble. Okay, like their memes about corrupt power and politicians and stuff is either their own or Putin. Okay, that's like their entire frame of, like their whole universe of memes. Like who are the bad guys in memes in the West? Well, for most people, for a minority of people, it's like Donald Trump, okay? For most people, it's like Klaus Schwab, and okay, right? So that's how it is in the West. People who are like follow memes that are kind of subversive and kind of against what's going on, you'll find Klaus Schwab, Bill Gates, things like that. Okay, these Ukrainians are living in an alternate universe. Like the whole focus of memetics and everything is like Ukrainian politicians that are accused of being, pro-Russian, and then, Shoigu, Putin, all of them, the Russians. That's their whole frame of reference, guy. That's everything, dude. So they're living, that's the world they're living in. Like there's the things happening in Western Europe are so far removed, like the internal politics of Western Europe and what's really going on in Western Europe is so far removed from their frame of reference. They're through Radio Free Liberty and Radio Free Europe, okay, they're being told that the kind of cultural Marxism, so to speak, I would call it maybe cultural capitalism, I don't know, but the cultural Marxism, so to speak, in Western Europe, they're being told, to the extent that they are aware of it, that this is just temporary, that this is just to undermine Russia and stuff like that, that this is just whatever show. They believe that their type of Nazism is going to inspire the rest of Europe to become like a neo-Nazi thing. They're not totally crazy in their thinking of that, because there are some mimetic signs and other signs of pushes of Europe to do such things. There was very dangerous mimetics I was studying for a while that was showing like a split screen, the one that shows like this society and then the other side is the other society. And it's kind of like one is like rainbows and the other one's like fucking toxic waste and stuff. Okay. So it was, two societies, but it was like, Russia, basically hell, and they're showing like Russia with some barbed wire, like it's Auschwitz, and everything looks like Auschwitz or something. It's really weird, and that's Russia. And then Europe, it was like blue flag with the beautiful like gold stars, and it had some like Greco-Roman statues and all this, like it was playing upon all these themes of like classical antiquity and like West, like Hitler's concept of the West, right? Like in his famous speech about the West and the origins, and from the Greeks at Sparta, at Thermopylae and all this stuff. So like the concept of the Western tradition. So that's a real thing on the agenda. I don't know that it's like in the first number of tiers of like likely outcomes, but that's what Ukrainian Nazis who think. Like that's what the ones like on the receiving end of monies and stuff think. Like the ones who are kind of a little bit above, but they're still in the matrix, right? It's just like ISIS guys. They were convinced, like they were like you have to understand where people's point of references are and literacy and stuff like this. Like you had in the Middle East, you had people being brought in to join ISIS from all over, North Africa and the Middle East, to fight in Syria. And like they were actually convinced that Assad and Netanyahu were allies. Okay, that's the reality bubble that they lived in, okay? Like that's where they were at in their minds, 100%. So if they can convince ISIS that Netanyahu and Assad are allies, okay, they can convince Ukrainians of many things as well. Mm-hmm. It's going to take 10 or 15 years to like undo this mess, at least. But yeah,
Yeah,
Matt,
absolutely.
they're living in an alternate reality. Like it's totally bizarre, and it's like doesn't even make any sense. Like they have Putin memes blaming them. This is like way before the war. They have like Putin memes blaming Putin for little inconveniences in life.
Yeah.
Like Putin's the reason that the line at the supermarket was long.
Well, Putin's gas tax, right? Even here, it's we've got a taste of that now.
Yeah, right. Well, it's like we've learned that from Ukraine.
Yeah.
You see.
Right. Well, as you pointed out, it is much more difficult to make this type of unnatural perversion of as far as sociological phenomena go or processes go. It is there it takes so much immense effort and resources to keep this type of thing going, and it is so much more natural that human beings ultimately look out for their genuine self-interest when you actually don't have CIA interventions, operations, cyclones, NED, all of these Soros operations. When you don't have that, we find that we tend to, as human beings, much more organically and naturally work together to solve problems.
Yes.
And
yeah.
so,
No,
I'd like to think
that's true. Yeah.
if we,
yeah. Well,
if we
it just reminds me when you say that, it reminds me of the story of Ahmed Karzai. The funniest story, right? He was an ExxonMobil executive, like friends of Condoleezza Rice and all these people, right? He was part of the Bush administration, effectively. He was of Afghan descent, but he, raised in England and went to, I don't know, Oxbridge, right? So he's like an economist at work with ExxonMobil, oil guy. The U.S. places him in charge of Afghanistan as like the puppet, right? Within 18 months or something, he's calling for US troops to leave Afghanistan. Why? Because politics is local.
mm-hmm.
And there wasn't enough support coming in to justify, to like prop up what they were doing in Afghanistan. They were like very strange operation there. And in reality, he needed the support of everyone around him on the ground.
Yeah.
And he was not backing everyone in Afghanistan. And he needed to say the things that everyone else in Afghanistan wanted to hear. So, yeah, it's like without this constant supply, I mean, honestly, think about messaging, think about how the system is staying in place with a 24-hour-a-day broadcast. Without all this electricity, without like all this stuff that keeps, and I'm not saying like that's the bad stuff. I'm saying just imagine if they couldn't communicate this stuff 24/7. If something happened, they couldn't communicate this stuff. It's like it goes away. It goes away on its own. So it takes a while. It takes 10 or 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
But without the source, it dries up.
Yeah.
These are bad ideas that are inorganic. Look, there are bad ideas that are organic. Okay. There are. Okay. But these are bad ideas that are inorganic. Okay. So there's no fertile soil. Like they have to ship these ideas in, like potted in the plants of crap soil. Like there's no firmament in the export location for these crops of crap to grow. Okay.
That's beautiful. That's a beautiful image. As soon as you take that pot out, it can't take hold. That's funny. That's a funny image, man. That's good. Yeah. Like that. No, I think that, yeah, this is good. It's a good reminder because oftentimes we can get a little demoralized. I think we all do with just the information overload and just sort of looking at the systems of oligarchical evil and manipulation in our present little moment in history, right? This little sliver of the past several hundred years is really just a sliver in a continuum of history, which we easily lose sight of. And so I think it's important to just recollect how unnatural this oligarchical thing is with the associated cultural things we're told are norms that we have to adapt to. No, not at all. This is actually something which is much weaker than it appears. When you take that broad, you take a step back, look at it from the broader scope, it's holding on by a bunch of lies that are not sustainable in a universe which is made good, which is made in accordance with non-stupidity, right? The universe is not made stupid. And so it'll tolerate stupidity. We do have freedom of will, but it is not an indefinite, sustainable way of being. And so the oligarchy, you know, they're clever, but ultimately they are unwilling to accept certain fundamental truths that I think, and I don't know if you think, yeah, I think you do think, make them in a certain way stupid, smart stupid maybe, but stupid nonetheless.
Yes, yes. Well, it is. It's so dumb to have access to so much material resource, right? Yet and not realize that this is not the meaning of this experience that we're having here. You know, you would think that at a certain point of having had all of it, that you would realize, yes, there's not an answer here. See, I can understand someone who grew up without certain things and then pursuing those things in life and thinking that's where the happiness is going to be. These people that don't have an excuse, I think that's why they keep looking for new highs. I think that's what explains a lot of the very dark stuff that they are up to behind closed doors. We're finding out about now, maybe through these Twitter leaks will come out, but I'm not very hopeful. I mean, I'm not very optimistic, I should say. I don't trust that much is going on very differently at Twitter, but you know, what gives me great cause, what gives me a lot of optimism is when I realized that the whole time that American society was on the up, okay, people were engaged, but there was still a lot to be done, and people were working on it. Okay, what happened is that we seem to have reached a certain level of comfort, even if it was being supported by credit lines and not actually wages keeping up with productivity the way it should have fairly been. Like since 1973 or 76 was it, wages have not kept up with productivity. That means that you cannot, by the way, that means that you can never in real applied economics blame inflation, like real inflation on rising wages, because rising wages are still not up to where they were, right, prior to us having inflation in crisis, prior to going off the metal, going into the total obscure, the new type of thinking and the development of the petrodollar, the fiat currency. They're all fiat, but we know what we mean when we say that. Matt, you know, the reason that this has happened is because while things were decent, people didn't have to pay attention. They didn't think they had to pay attention. It had been said in the past, you know, by smarter people than I, and more eloquently, of course, that that freedom and our liberties are only preserved through vigilance, like perpetual vigilance of the citizens. And we didn't do that. Okay, we didn't keep the faith. We had it. I think we tried in some ways, but we tried from the perspective of having. It's a lot like a Rocky movie. You know, you have to want it, and you can't want it if you have it. You know, you have to let go of everything and just bring yourself back to that place of building yourself up again. I think that's where the United States is actually at. But the reason I'm optimistic is because Americans are problem solvers. Americans have built great things. Think about it. But these things happened out of necessity and inspiration. And we live in a time where only now do we have the necessity for inspiration. And, you know, we didn't have that. We slacked, you know, we lost, we handed power over to our oligarchy completely. They always were powerful. We were always fighting them, but we were vigilant. Okay, we were vigilant. And I don't suspect that in this type of, like at this technological level, like within this, you know, period of the next 30, 50, 70 years-ish, okay? I don't think that oligarchs can be eliminated, all right? It's like an ecosystem, okay? We're all human beings, but they're like a type of a predator branch of humanity, okay? They tend to be psychopaths, all right? And sociopathology is very highly, statistically, unnaturally high in this category of humanity. it's whatever percent, 0.00 something percent that they represent numerically on the planet, the oligarchy. The power they've had over policy and decision making, of course, has been very lopsided historically, but now is the moment of their unprecedented, disproportionate inequality of power and wealth at this time. And yet, where do they do with it? How do they experience it? Do we all feel like they think that things are stable? Do we all think that they think? Do they really think that? No, they don't. So this is kind of like, I don't know if it's Sisyphus or Narcissus or whatever it is, but there's some Greek tragedy in here that you know better about this, because for however much they have wanted, it's like a thirst that they can't satisfy. And for however much that they say that this is the best, for however much they gaze at themselves in the reflection of the pond and say that this is the definition of beauty, that this is all there is to look at. For the rest of us, we're looking at all these pieces and fires and decay and ashes and toxic waste, sledging out of this image. And so I think it's like this, dude. I mean, in my study of hundreds of years of class struggles, of social movements and populist movements, left ones, conservative, everything, right? The human experience, man, this is what has happened time and time again. People don't get their act together until the final act, okay? And the reason, like you said it just before, like these oligarchs are kind of like stupid in this like smart way. They've convinced themselves that their methods of holding on to power right now are the methods that one uses, to come into power, right? They think that the thing that they've been handed, that what they've inherited, works a way that it does not work. They think it works in the way that flatters and justifies their position in it. But they are the least essential aspect. They are the inessential worker. They're actually not workers at all. So I think that the total consciousness collapse of our ruling class, that final moment when they basically said that all humanity, I guess, are useless eaters. I think we know this is an older expression. We know that this is the belief system of the cabal, but it was openly expressed with this attempt at this botched reset, whatever they believe that hasn't really been happening, I suppose, but they think it is, or they're declaring it. So when I look at the failure of their attempts to do this and their declaration that humanity is redundant, that in psychology is called projection. If you actually look at they're the only ones whose roles have become redundant, okay? Actually, a lot of the stuff that they do is the stuff that's best automated. And the stuff that people do is actually the stuff that's best done by people. The stuff that they're doing, they're personalizing basically robotic actions. I mean, you don't need human beings to do a lot of the things that they're doing, right? So when they talk about useless eaters, they're referring to themselves. So the fact that they failed to affect this transformation of society, like they've forgotten about this apparently. Like we stopped talking about it. Do we still have the blue book and the white book? Because they laid it all out in there. And when you read it for yourself, because you can, it's also a PDF online. It's very clear, Matt, that they were talking about billions of people being dead. And that everything was good. They're talking about build back better. And you're reading this and you're going, from what? What bomb went off that I was unaware of? What world-ending event occurred that didn't occur that we're building back from? Building back better is when you think about Japanese animation about building back after atomic global war or something like that. It's you think this Herculean effort mobilizing hundreds of millions of people into public works projects and going in and clearing out dead bodies and like rebuilding societies and building cities from some, like, I don't know, zombie apocalypse. Like, where did this fucking thing happen? It never happened, but they wrote about it and something stopped it. And we're not acknowledging what got stopped. It was imminent. I mean, not a slow burn. Yeah, they're going the slow burn route and they're still pushing, but there was something that was supposed to be like pow, pop, bam, that we're all like building back from, and that didn't happen. And now maybe they want, you know, a nuclear war or whatever to be that thing. But clearly you can see it's a script. Clearly you can see that they're the criminals.
Well said. I think that that's a perfect way to round out today's excellent afternoon and evening and morning, for depending on which part of the world we're sitting in. Anybody who has not yet done so, Joaquin, are you still taking on new subscribers to your channel, or did you want to cap it at a certain?
No, I'm just an entertainer now, so we can go.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
I'm only a comedian now. Yeah.
All right. No one can accuse you of being an agent of influence. All right. Good. So, Joaquin's channel, like I said, is a must to start your day with, end your day with. It's fantastic. It's t.me/new resistance. I've got it in the link in the chat box as well as in the description box of this video. I just want to thank everybody. This has been a really, really bountiful, substantial Sunday afternoon, morning, evening. Joaquin, thank you so much for taking the time, and I'm looking forward to the next masterclass.
Thank you for inviting me. Thanks, guys. This is something I love doing, and I made sure that, you know, Casa Flores was ordered properly so that we could do this without, you know, trapeze flying infants in the background and stuff. So
cool. All right. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
bye.
Bye. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Joaquin. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take
Okay,
care.
bye now.